The 24th of August is a significant day for Ukraine, usually reserved for the celebration of its independence from the Soviet Union. But this year is a bittersweet one, as the 24th of August also marks the 6-month anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Once the tanks rolled into eastern Ukraine early on Thursday the 24th of February, many thought the fall of Ukraine would be imminent. But due to a strong backing from both home and from abroad, Ukraine managed to stave off a full invasion, refusing to let Kiev fall. The same, however, could not be said for areas of eastern Ukraine, such as Mariupol, Kherson and Severodonetsk, which are now occupied by Russia. But whilst Russia may have gained some land, it lost many soldiers, became an international pariah, and has witnessed a NATO expansion eastwards towards its border. So where do we go from here? Is there an end in sight? And would this end satisfy one, both, or neither party? Even with sanctions, is Russia too big to fail? What next for both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky? How different will Europe be before and after the war? And, 6 months in, who has the upper hand?
So let's get to it. 6 months in, who has the upper hand? Let's begin our conversation with this quick round of 30 seconds around each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation right after. So, Ms. Hopko, please take the lead.
Thank you so much, and happy independence to my country. And I would say that the war started in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine with illegal annexation of Crimea. So it's already 8 years of ongoing Russian aggression and 6 months of full-scale escalation. But the fighting spirit of Ukrainian nation is so high. So we resisted. We didn't allow Putin to occupy the capital where I'm sitting now, our beautiful Kyiv.
Yeah. Yes, we will make a stop right here, but obviously we'll continue to touch upon all those issues in a split second. Dr. Morozov, your take, please.
Look, I think the situation today is more or less even. I would say that this is a pot situation, as we can call it in the chess game, because no country actually decided the task they were putting behind them. So neither Russia did nor Ukraine liberated its territory. So basically we're on the same spot.
Stagnation to an extent. Last but definitely not least, Mr. Dan Perry, your thoughts?
Both Ukraine and Russia can claim something resembling success. Russia has occupied almost a quarter of Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, didn't let its government fall, didn't let Kiev fall, embarrassed the Russian military in the field quite spectacularly. I would say that Russia is a stronger party on the ground, and that's a version of the upper hand, but Ukraine has performed better relative to expectations.
And speaking to that point, exactly, and from this point onwards, please feel free to interact, dear panelists. Speaking of Ukraine, we're somewhat seeing this shift in focus, mainly targeting Russian infrastructure at the moment. And this shift in focus is fascinating for two reasons. Let's begin with the first one, this very clear-cut message that Ukraine is not reactive, but rather proactive. Ms. Hopko.
Yeah, of course, because for last 6 months, Ukrainian armed forces proven that from the beginning of full-scale escalation, so we, by defending Kyiv, we demonstrated our capacity to defend all Ukraine with the complete victory in the future. And I do believe with more weapons, heavy artillery, fighter jets, and NATO standards weapon, because within the 6 months, we've seen the shift, geopolitical shift, when no one believed that Ukraine is able. Remember this forecast that Ukraine falls in 72 hours by different intelligence services. And actually, we succeeded to defend Kyiv. And actually, from Soviet junk weapon we used to receive previously, now our armed forces proved that we are capable to operate NATO standard tanks, even fighter jets. We have pilots who are capable to operate F-16. So this is another unique moment when Ukraine is contributing to global security, helping the world to wake up finally and take seriously the authoritarianism and totalitarianism from Russia as a threat, not just for Ukraine, but also for the whole world, because besides Russia, there is another authoritarian regimes which are considering the war, Russian war, as a window of opportunity for them. But we would like to see how West is helping Ukraine actually stopping all totalitarianism and authoritarianism, not just in Ukraine, but also in Indo-Pacific region.
No doubt that everything that's happening in the Ukraine has a clear-cut ripple effect elsewhere in the world. And Dr. Morozov, the second message perhaps that we're seeing with this shift in Ukrainian focus, perhaps in my opinion, is even stronger. And as Ms. Hopko clearly said, not even alluded to, the war began and will end in the Crimean Peninsula. And interestingly enough, a survey conducted at the end of June but published about a week ago indicates an increase in the number of Ukrainians who think that the war should end with the, quote, liberation of the Crimean Peninsula. A very sharp rise. Is that perhaps the new framework we're looking at?
Probably from the Ukrainian side, yes. I'm not sure that this is the framework from the Russian side. Look, if we are looking from the Russian perspective, I think that actually, first, my Israeli colleague is absolutely right. The countries are not equal in their army, let's say, numbers and all the possibilities, military possibilities. So the tasks that were put by Mr. Putin on the 24th of February were not reached. Yes, Kyiv was not captured, and Ukraine is still struggling. And in a way, this is a kind of, I would say, the loss in the original plans of the Russian leadership. Still, it is rather strong, and also I can't stop thinking about very peculiar analogy. Let's say that in the dark, some criminal is attacking you, and you are trying to defend yourself. And okay, around there is a mob of people who are helping you mainly by the advice. Okay, this is just allegory, you must understand. But for instance, they're saying that stop, you can't beat the attacker as strong as you can. You can't beat him in the head, you can't beat him in the back. You must
beat him respectfully.
International rules. Can you win the war such way? I'm not sure.
Interesting. And Mr. Perry, perhaps the Ukrainian objectives are clearer now. Do we have any better take on what are the Russian renewed objectives, if you will?
Oh, for that you'd need telepathy and to figure out what Vladimir Putin really means when he says whatever he says. But I think we're seeing Ukraine a little bit posturing here and putting forth some courageous and even brazen positions, because ultimately they started off by demanding the status quo ante of February, and now they're demanding something else, the status quo ante of 2014. Whether this is real or not, I do not know. Whether they're really going to attack Russian infrastructure and risk provoking a much stronger power this way remains to be seen, but it certainly does show that they're feeling more confident after, as we all agree, have been their successes on the battlefield.
And part of being more confident, as Mr. Perry is putting it, Ms. Hopko, what about the internal criticism over Zelensky? We're starting to hear some here and there that the south of the country was occupied too quickly, that he was not attentive enough to Western intelligence before the war. Is this trend likely to increase or still marginalized?
So actually, everyone in Ukraine is now expressing strong support to Ukrainian president, Ukrainian armed forces, which also includes General Zaluzhny. And I think this is the key for us
to continue
demonstrate
the momentum. Yeah.
Yes, to continue momentum. And let me also mention that 93% of the population believe that Ukraine is winning and can win the war. And by victory, we mean full restoration of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine.
You know, may I ask a question of my Ukrainian colleague here?
Please,
Yes,
Mr. Perry.
please.
There's a very good argument for not allowing aggression to yield any benefit. That's clear. And if Russian revanchism towards Ukraine were allowed to be profitable, that could obviously embolden China and Azerbaijan, even vis-a-vis Armenia, and plenty of other bad faith players on the world stage. So no argument there. But the internal borders of the Soviet Union were purposely organized for chaos, with a mixing of populations and, you know, Ukrainians in Moldova and Armenians in Azerbaijan and Russians in Ukraine. So I have to ask, would it not be perhaps practical for Ukraine to give up these territories in the same way that it might be practical for Israel to give up the West Bank? Different circumstances, but same idea. The rendering of a future where we might have demographic cohesion. Do you consider
So
this?
maybe Russian Federation should finally listen to indigenous people living at the territory of modern Russian Federation. I mean, Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, Yakutia, they also have the right for self.
No disagreement at all.
And actually, you mentioned Soviet Union. You mentioned Soviet Union, and where is Soviet Union now? Collapsed 31 years ago, and there is independent Ukraine. And even Russian-speaking Ukrainians, they are against Russian regime.
Dr.
They
Morozov,
don't want to be a part of Russian Ruski Mir.
Yeah, Dr. Morozov, your comments before we need to wrap up this part of the debate briefly,
Look,
please.
I can also propose some very good solution that was taken in 1923 when Greek-Turkish exchange of territories and exchange of population actually happened.
Yeah.
So this solution can be also used.
Yes, allow me to update you, dear panelists. As we speak, President Zelensky of Ukraine is updating that, saying that Russian strike kills 15, wounds 50 at Ukraine's railway station as the country is celebrating Independence Day. And on that note, we will take a very quick break now, but we'll be right back after it with the rest of the summit as we will be trying to look ahead. Is there any end in sight? We are obviously not staying on topic, but no hindsight, but rather looking ahead. So before we get back to the conversation, let's hear the recent remarks from Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
We finally became united, a new nation born on February the 24th at 4 a.m. Not born, but reborn. A nation that did not cry, scream, or take fright. One that did not flee, did not give up, and did not forget.
The national flag symbolizes loyalty to our traditional values, from which we will never deviate. Truth and justice, solidarity and mercy, respect for the centuries-old, uninterrupted history of Russia, for the achievements and victories of our ancestors, who bequeathed us to save and protect the motherland, never to allow external dictation and hegemony.
What is the end of the war for us? We used to say peace, but now we say victory. We won't look for a mutual understanding with a terrorist, even though we understand the Russian language you came to defend while killing thousands of people you came to liberate.
So let's get to it with another quick 30-second round each. Is there an end in sight? Dr. Morozov, please take the lead. Dr. Boris Morozov, can you hear us? Please.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. I don't think that we are really can foresee some kind of end of the conflict in the nearest future. I just don't see it. I don't see enough strength in Ukraine to overcome Russian strength, and I don't see also enough strength in Russia to capture more territories and to find something to prove the victory.
So not a matter of a resolute ending, but rather a weakness that you're describing on both sides. That's interesting. Dan Perry, your take?
It's hard to imagine an end without some major change in the situation, be it the fall of Putin or the fall of Zelensky or the fall of Kiev or some nuclear accident. Given that we have that none of those appear to be imminent, and I certainly hope a nuclear accident isn't imminent, we are basically in a war of attrition, and what happens now depends on the whim of one man who is surrounded by a cabal that depends on him for their stolen wealth and probably for their lives. And as we see inflation and shortages all over the world, this is an absurd position for the world to be in.
Hanna, Hopko, your thoughts?
So more weapons for Ukraine, tougher sanctions against Russia, and this is the way to go to help Ukraine to liberate all occupied territories. Because what's happening in Ukraine, it's a genocide. Let's be very clear. And all massive missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, deliberate attack on civilians. So Russia actually wants to destroy Ukrainians as a nation, not just to occupy territories. It's like a genocide, a man-made, organized by Stalin in last century, now by Putin.
And please, panelists, feel free to engage in the conversation. Let's continue from that point that Hanna Hopko just meant about international support. Should we make a distinction between Western and American support? Is it likely to assume that the U.S. at some point will say, you know what, we're throwing to the trash or down the drain billions of dollars we've invested and we're ending our support just because the satellite situation, let's put it that way, will deteriorate? Dan Perry.
I don't think America's going to walk away from this. It would be too costly to Biden, who's already paying a tremendous price for his very pitiful exit from Afghanistan. Rather, I think the big question, one of the big questions, is whether the world is going to get its act together to truly make the sanctions against Russia be global. I mean, if you look at the fact that Russia's been able to shore up the ruble, has vastly increased its trade with Brazil, India, and China, and basically is nowhere near collapse, and not even all of its banks are off SWIFT. I mean, the sanctions began initially in February and March as rather strong, and at this point, I think they look a little bit weak-kneed, and that is one thing that might make a difference. Although, of course, for that, you need to get Russia, or rather India and China on side, which doesn't seem likely without monumental pressure.
And speaking about cohesion or unity of foreign entities, will a nuclear incident, as Mr. Perry put it, be enough to trigger Article 5, Dr. Morozov?
Look, I hope this will never happen, frankly.
Right.
And as far as I see it, the war could be prevented originally. For instance, if NATO would say that, just would declare that they are closing the Ukrainian sky and not just predict the possibility of the attack and the outbreak of the war, but also say that in case of attack, the war would start, probably there would be no war. I think it looks like nobody wants now the nuclear conflict. And also, I think that in a way, today's sanctions, yes, I agree, stopped working as they worked in the beginning, because in the very beginning, everybody was frightened in Russia of these sanctions. And now everybody can see that, okay, yes, they lost this, they lost that product, probably some medicine, but in principle, this is the country which got used for many years to live in very, I would say, poor conditions. So now the conditions are much better than during the Stalin period or during even the Brezhnev ones, material conditions. And, so I also think that sanctions are not working properly.
Yes, and Ms. Hopko, you know, as far-fetched as it may sound at this point in time, the diplomatic route might be the way out at some point. So in terms of negotiations, Zelensky can't really allow himself to an extent to engage in negotiations without posing some preconditions. The Russians not showing great interest in doing so. Are we likely to see pressure on Ukraine to begin negotiations increasing as the oil crisis intensifies?
So we want to liberate all Ukrainian territories. We do not believe in any peace talks, negotiations. After 8 years of Minsk agreement, Normandy format, when we were trying in a diplomatic, political way to solve Russian aggression. So no illusions anymore. And after Bucha, after Mariupol, after millions of people which were forced to leave Ukraine, killed, raped women. So we will continue documenting war crimes for future international tribunal and compensation reparations for all losses. So this is the key, not just for us. It's important to restore the global security architecture, which was broken. It's also important for global justice. So this is why Ukraine defeats Russia first military, then negotiation starts. So,
Well,
and President Zelensky knows the public opinion, and how could every inch of Ukraine should be free from Russian occupiers. We cannot concede, give up any territory of Ukraine.
I understand that's the position, but of course diplomacy is the art of the possible. And I have to say, if Putin was a little bit less demonic and a little more clever, he might consider the option of, at this point, now that he controls Luhansk and Donetsk and Mariupol and other places, he might just declare victory, say his major goals have been achieved in eastern Ukraine, hold fake referendums showing the people there want to join Russia, which of course I know even the Russians, many of them don't. And move on. And I think at that point, the world, which fears the consequences of this conflict, and even Ukrainians who are talking tough now, but I mean, they're not enjoying this war, might be willing to cut their losses and move on. And Russia, of course, would remain a pariah state, but the war would be over.